Thank you, Mr Deputy President. I am glad that the Coalition have brought this motion forward in the MPI this afternoon. I think this hour much too often is a total waste of oxygen and I tend to avoid it, but this particular subject is something that I think does deserve further scrutiny. I listened carefully to Senator Johnston's remarks and find myself in agreement with some of them, particularly as he refers to the direction taken by the 2009 Defence White Paper, but then decisions taken subsequently to avoid grappling with some of the priorities that it set out. And in essence, I think what we've done is set the ADF and the DMO on an impossible task. I was hoping for a contribution from Senator Crossan that would maybe take us back to first principles. Maybe Senator Bishop or Senator Feeney, who do know a fair bit about this area, can help answer some of the questions that I'm going to put this afternoon about why we write white papers in the first place, and even go back further to first principles as to why we maintain the degree of defence spending that we do. Minister Smith fairly recently at an ASPI event put forward the standard and I think would be acceptable and understood by most Australians expectation that the purpose and the reason why we do this is for, in quotes, the defence of Australia against a direct armed attack. However, the 2009 White Paper significantly confuses this. The traditional and most clearly understood explanation that the reason that we maintain the defence forces that we do is for the defence of Australia against direct armed attack. Actually, it's not the direct experience of the deployments in the post-war era, which is obviously a very significant marker and way to define the period. But it's not at all what the Australian Defence Force have been doing. I want to quote an article by Hugh White in the September issue of The Monthly, who's somebody who does an enormous amount of thinking about these issues, who says, "Few people in government or defence think that Australia faces any credible risk of major military attack, and fewer still believe we could defend ourselves if we did." And he goes on that, of course, apart from defending our shores, the ADF has always had something to do. Peacekeeping in the Middle East, now I suspect he uses that term euphemistically, if invasion of two countries on the other side of the world could be described as peacekeeping, but we'll let that go. Nation building in East Timor, tsunami relief in Indonesia, or fighting bushfires in Victoria. But these aren't reasons enough to have a defence force. It's an extremely thought-provoking article. But it goes, to my mind, to the enormous degree to which the 2009 Defence White Paper set an impossible set or range of strategic goals. And since then, as Senator Johnston quite ably demonstrated, the Australian government has failed to provide the resources needed. Now, in effect, that might be a good thing, because I think, in fact, some of the decisions or some of the positions taken in the Defence White Paper of 2009 are significantly flawed. The procurement decisions that go back several decades and the force structure that prevails at the moment, I think, significantly confuse and don't pay regard to the idea that this is about the defence of Australia against direct armed attack. In fact, what we're kidding ourselves out for is providing force elements to expeditionary invasions by the United States government on the far side of the world, or the more prosaic, but to my mind far more important interventions in our regions, where in many instances the ADF were welcomed, or, for that matter, those domestic interventions such as after the floods in Queensland or the Victorian bushfires, where in many instances the first boots on the ground are those of the Australian Defence Force. But the White Paper sets us on a path of building 12 gigantic submarines, sets us on the path to procuring joint strike fighters at the cost of billions and billions of dollars. We've kitted out main battle tanks, apparently for invasions or for fighting battles of World War II. Air warfare destroyers that appear to be aimed at giving us significant offensive capabilities in the region that, to my mind, go directly against Defence Minister Smith's observations at the ASPI event. I think there is substantial confusion at the very headwaters, if you like, that then lead to all the ongoing procurement decisions and debacles that we've seen in recent years as to what kind of security challenges, what the genuine security threats of the century that we are now into the second decade of look like, and therefore how we should kit ourselves out, particularly in a more narrower sense, the role that we want the ADF to play. And there's one issue that I suppose senators will understand why it's one that I raise, but I'm going to quote the Lowy Institute on this, who pointed out as long ago as 2006, climate change is fast emerging as the security issue of the 21st century, overshadowing terrorism and even the spread of weapons of mass destruction, as the threat most likely to cause mass casualties and contribute to state failure, forced population movements, food and water scarcity and the spread of infectious diseases. Now, I was reading from a document then, so I couldn't tell whether there was eye-rolling around the chamber at the fact that a Green senator would seek to link climate change as a genuine security threat, because in fact the 2009 white paper reduces that issue to a footnote and suggests that we don't need to worry about climate change as impacting on national security until the 2030s, which I think is absolutely delusional and quite dangerous. If you look at the literature, a large number of situations around the world at the moment in various trouble spots and regions where of great political and military instability already have the fingerprints of climate change on them, because this is not something abstract about parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. It's about water resources disappearing. It's about changes in the ability of given regions to produce food, which can then have direct impacts on political stability. I understand from a book which I would thoroughly recommend, and I'd table 76 copies of it if I had them with me, called Tropic of Chaos, which goes through trouble spots around the world and identifies the fingerprints of climate change. Doesn't matter whether you believe that it's human-induced or not. I'll come to that in a moment. But the ADF apparently developed a classified report in 2007 identifying the threat of climate security, but the white paper, for reasons I can't fathom, said that it should be dealt with in 2030. The US Attorney for Army Environmental Command states, for the military, whether climate change is caused by man, is naturally occurring, or is some combination of the two, is immaterial. The military cannot wait for the science to be perfected to begin planning for the potential effects of global climate change. Now, we know that budgets are tight and resources are not endless, but I'm extremely concerned that we are nonetheless posturing our defence forces for the wrong kinds of conflict. Of course, we have to be prepared for direct armed attack, but I believe we have to be prepared for the kind of low-intensity conflicts that are already arising around the world as a result of instability brought on in fragile states by climate change, and it's something that I do not believe can be ignored any further. I don't believe the traditional state-to-state war scenario should be the sole focus of defence spending, particularly in the context of the kind of situations that we are already sending the ADF into, at which some of the gigantic procurement decisions made by this government will be utterly useless, while we are spending money on things like a gigantic fleet of submarines to put us into the South China Sea, air warfare destroyers or joint strike fighters. The enormous opportunity cost of those spending decisions mean that we can't do certain things. I think that, in fact, directly undermines our defence capabilities. The lack of a consistent, coherent, honest and independent national security strategy is seriously a threat to us at the moment. Defence spending without that national security strategy, I think, really undermines our security. And not as the opposition suggests, and with greatest respect to Senator Johnson, simply quoting defence spending as a ratio of GDP is utterly valueless. Who cares? Are we getting value for money? Are we getting the kind of capabilities that we're going to need to confront the security challenges of this century? Those are the things that I want to know. The financial metrics that Senator Johnson's putting before the chamber, I actually dismiss as completely irrelevant. What matters, I think, are whether we're going to be properly positioned to face up to the genuine security threats. What's our strategy for meeting and responding to those threats, mitigating those that we can, adapting to those that we can't mitigate, and only then do we come to the decision of what role we want the ADF to play. The opposition, I should say, have declared themselves not competent, because senior members of the leadership team are infested with climate change deniers. Can you imagine if you took into national security debates denial of the most significant security threat of the 21st century and simply pretend that it's not happening? I notice some of the senators are arcing up, and this will be hard to hear. You are pretending that the most significant security threat facing the world's nations in this century doesn't exist. How lovely for you. How nice that must be. I look forward to the development of the next white paper. I hope it's not a wasted or missed opportunity. But one thing I want to underline is that we can't wait until the 2030s to confront these questions.
Thank you, Senator Ludlam.